I'm standing in my kitchen right now, and the kettle is warm against my hand. Outside, it's 19 degrees. In here, it's 68. This whole place used to be a rusted travel trailer somebody left in a field to rot. I built a home out of the thing nobody would touch. That's not a saying, that's the truth, and I lived every day of it. Everything you're about to hear actually happened to me, and I remember what all of it cost, down to the dollar. There's one discarded thing I found for free. Most people walk right past it, and it's the reason my pipes never froze and my floor stopped feeling like ice. I'll show you exactly what it was, but I need to take you back first. Back to the night, I had $11, a sleeping bag, and no address. You don't need money for this. You don't need land. I had neither, and I'm telling you, it can still be done. Let me take you back to that field. It was late October when I first saw the trailer. I wasn't looking for a home. I was looking for a place to sleep where nobody would knock on the glass and tell me to move. I'd been sleeping in my car for 6 weeks by then. A 1998 Buick with a back seat that never got warm. I remember waking up one morning with frost on the inside of the windshield, on my side of the glass, and thinking that was the loneliest thing I'd ever seen. Frost on the inside. Like the cold had gotten into the room with me and made itself at home. I'd lost my apartment the spring before. It doesn't matter how, exactly. A job that ended, a landlord who raised the rent by $200 in one letter, and a savings account that was never really savings, just the gap between one disaster and the next. The trailer sat at the back edge of a property owned by an old farmer named Dale. It had been there so long the weeds had grown up through the tow hitch. Both tires were flat and cracked. One window was gone completely, covered with a garbage bag that had torn into ribbons. Inside, the floor was soft with water damage, and it smelled like mice and wet paper. Dale found me standing next to it. I thought he was going to run me off. Instead, he looked at the trailer, then looked at me, and said, "You want that thing, it's yours." Saves me hauling it to the dump. That was the whole deal. No paperwork, no money. He told me I could park my life on that back corner as long as I kept it quiet and didn't cause him trouble. People assume you need to buy land before you can begin. You don't. You need one person to say yes, and sometimes that person is just tired of looking at their own junk. So the first thing I owned in almost half a year was a trailer that was, by every reasonable measure, garbage. And here's where I have to be honest with you because I promised I would be. That first night inside, it was worse than the car. At least the car sealed. The trailer had that broken window, gaps around the door, and a hole in the floor near the back the size of a dinner plate where you could see the dirt underneath. The wind didn't blow past this place. It blew through it. I lay on that soft floor in my sleeping bag, and I could feel the cold coming up from the ground, right through the rot, into my spine. I remember lying there doing the math. I had $11. Winter was coming, and I'd traded a car that at least held its heat for a metal box that leaked it in every direction. I almost quit right there. I want you to know that. The story where I stand in a warm kitchen only exists because I didn't, but that first night I was about 90% quit. What stopped me was the hole in the floor, not fixing it, just staring at it. Because I realized the ground under the trailer wasn't windy. The wind was up here, at floor level, cutting sideways. The ground itself was still, and some very old part of my brain, the part that remembers things it never learned, thought, animals don't sleep up in the wind. They dig down to where the air is quiet. That thought is the whole reason I'm here. Hold on to it, because it comes back at the end and it changes everything. But before I could think about the ground, I had to close up the box. So the next morning, I started with the window and the door, because a house you can't heat isn't a house. It's a tent made of metal. Now, the assumption most people have is that fixing up a place like this takes thousands of dollars and a truck full of tools. I had neither. What I had was a 5-mile radius and a lot of time, and it turns out those two things are worth more than money if you're patient. The torn garbage bag over the window had to go. I replaced it with something I pulled out of a construction dumpster behind a strip mall that was being remodeled. A sheet of rigid foam insulation, the pink kind, board insulation, about 2 inches thick. There were 4 broken pieces of it thrown out because they had chips in the corners, and a contractor threw away what would have cost me around $30 a sheet at a hardware store. I carried 3 sheets home on foot, one at a time, over 2 days. That foam became my window. I cut it with a bread knife to fit the frame, wedged it in tight, and taped the edges with duct tape I bought for $4, which was a real dent in my 11. Suddenly the wind stopped screaming through that corner, and the foam does something a garbage bag never could. Rigid foam board carries an insulation value of about 5 per inch, so those 2 inches gave me a wall where there used to be a hole. That number mattered to me later when the real cold came. For now, all I knew was the screaming stopped. The door was worse, because a door has to open. Around the whole frame there were gaps you could slide a pencil through. I fixed that with the cheapest miracle I ever found. Weather stripping foam tape. A roll of it cost me a little under $6 at the dollar store, and it seals gaps you didn't even know were stealing your heat. I ran it around the entire door frame. When I closed the door that evening and the latch pulled the foam tight against the metal, I heard the sound change. The inside got quieter. That quiet is the sound of heat staying where you put it. I slept better that second night. Not warm, not yet, but not bleeding heat from every seam. That's when I hit the first real wall, though, and it's the one that breaks most people. The floor. Because you can seal every window and every door, and if the floor is rotten and open to the ground, you're heating the entire outdoors. Cold comes up. Everybody thinks about the roof and the walls and forgets that half your comfort is under your feet. And my floor wasn't just cold, it was structurally gone in places. That dinner plate hole was one soft spot of many. I stood in that trailer looking at the floor, thinking I'd traded my last stable thing for a project I couldn't afford to finish. This is the part nobody films. The part where you've started and it's still ugly and you can't see the end. So let me tell you what I did, because it's the kind of thing you can do too, with almost nothing. I fixed the floor with pallets and a tarp and cardboard in that order from the bottom up. Pallets are everywhere, and most businesses will give them to you free, because otherwise they pay to dispose of them. I asked behind a garden center, and a man loaded 6 of them into a borrowed truck for me and seemed glad to be rid of them. I broke some apart for the good boards and used the rest whole. First, I laid a heavy tarp over the worst of the rotten subfloor, tucking it down into the hole so ground moisture couldn't wick up. A contractor-grade tarp ran me about $12, and I want you to notice I'm keeping a running total in my head the whole time, because I never once forgot how little I had. Over the tarp, I laid pallet boards, screwed down into whatever solid floor joist I could still find underneath. Over the boards, I put down flattened cardboard boxes, layer after layer, because dry cardboard is a real insulator, not a joke one. Grocery stores break down hundreds of boxes a night and will hand them to you by the armful. And then, on top of all of it, I found the thing that made the floor feel like a floor instead of a raft: interlocking foam mats, the kind people put down in a child's playroom or a home gym. I found a whole set of them at a thrift store, missing a few pieces, for $3 for the box. They snap together like a puzzle, they're waterproof on top, and they put a cushioned, insulating layer between your foot and everything cold below it. When I stood on that floor for the first time in socks and didn't feel the cold bite up through my heels, I actually laughed out loud in an empty trailer. First time I'd laughed in a while. So the box was sealed, the floor was solid, and I'd spent altogether less than the cost of one night in the cheapest motel in that county. I looked it up later. That motel charged $59 a night. I built the shell of a home for less than that, one dumpster and one free pallet at a time, but sealing the box just revealed the next problem, and this one had teeth, because now I had a tight little space and no way to heat it and no way to cook, and the first hard freeze was maybe 2 weeks out. Sealing a box you can't warm just means you've built yourself a very tidy refrigerator. And this is where I ran into the people, the judgment. I'd been so busy fighting the trailer I hadn't had to face them yet. I went into a hardware store to price a small heater, and I must have looked how I felt, because a clerk followed me down 2 aisles. Not to help, to watch. Like I was gonna slip something into my coat. I remember I put down the cheapest heater on the shelf and walked out with my face burning, and I heard him say to the other clerk, not quietly, "Those people never buy anything anyway." Those people. I want to talk about that phrase for a second, because if you've ever been broke, you've heard it, even when nobody said it out loud. There's a way the world looks at you when you don't have an address. Like being poor is a character flaw instead of a math problem, like you did it on purpose. Like the frost on the inside of your own windshield was somehow a decision you made. And here's the part that took me years to understand, and it made me angrier than the clerk ever did. It's expensive to be poor. The people with the least pay the most for everything. I couldn't buy a good heater, so I was about to pay more. Over the winter, running a bad one. I couldn't buy insulation, so I paid in cold. Payday lenders, deposit fees, the price of doing everything the slow, hard way because you can't afford the fast, cheap way up front. There's a whole machine that runs on keeping people exactly one step behind, and I was standing right in the gears of it. But standing in the gears is also where you learn how the machine works, and I got stubborn. That clerk did me a favor, though he'd hate to hear it, because I walked out of that store and decided I was never going to hand my warmth over to anybody who thought I was a thief for being cold. So I heated the trailer for almost nothing, and I did it in a way that clerk never would have believed. The first thing was a small propane heater, the portable kind made for indoor use, the kind with the safety shutoff that turns it off if the oxygen drops or it tips over. That part matters, and I'll say it plainly because I care about you and I made mistakes. I want you to skip. Never, ever burn anything indoors without ventilation and without a carbon monoxide alarm. I bought a battery carbon monoxide alarm for about $20 before I ever lit a flame, and it is the single most important thing I bought that entire winter. A 1-pound propane cylinder ran me a few dollars and gave me hours of heat, and in that sealed, insulated little box, hours of heat went a long way. But propane costs money every single day, and money was the thing I didn't have. So I stopped trying to heat the air and started trying to keep the heat I already had. That's the secret nobody tells you. It's not about making more heat, it's about not losing the heat you make. I covered the windows at night with the reflective windshield sunshades from cars. You've seen them, the folding silver ones that keep a dashboard from cooking in summer. A thrift store had a bin of them for 50 cents each. I bought 6. At night, I wedged them into the windows, silver side in, and they bounce your body heat and your heater's heat back into the room instead of letting it pour out through the glass. The temperature difference was real and immediate. Glass is where a warm room goes to die, and I'd plugged it for $3. I hung moving blankets on the walls, the thick, quilted kind, which a moving company sold me damaged for $2 a piece. They cut the drafts, and they held the warmth like a coat holds it against your body. I made a heavy curtain out of one more of them and hung it to split the trailer in half, so at night I was only heating the small end where I slept, not the whole length. You heat the person and the small space, not the empty air. That one change cut my propane use nearly in half. And I cooked on a single-burner butane stove I found at a yard sale for $5, with the little butane cans that cost about $1 each and last for hours of cooking. Rice, beans, oats, eggs when I had them. Cheap food, hot food, cooked in my own place with my own hands. There is a dignity in that you cannot buy. The first hot meal I made in that trailer, I ate sitting on an upturned bucket, and it was the best thing I ever tasted, and it cost about 40 cents. Now I need to stop and talk to you directly. Yes, you. The one listening to this thinking it sounds nice for me, but it could never be you. You don't have a farmer's field. You don't have a trailer. You think you have nothing to start with, so there's no point starting. I'm telling you this next part is for you specifically, because I was exactly where you are. Start with the ceiling, not the building. You don't need a trailer to begin. If you are in a car tonight, weather stripping foam tape and a set of reflective sunshades will change how you survive this week, and together they cost under $10. If you have a room you can't afford to heat, the moving blanket on the wall and the blanket curtain splitting off a smaller sleeping space will let you heat a corner instead of a house. If you have a cold floor anywhere, cardboard under a rug tonight, foam mats when you can find them, will get the cold out of your feet and let you sleep. None of this requires permission. None of it requires a landlord's signature or a bank's approval. It requires you to walk behind one strip mall and look in one dumpster and ask one business for their pallets. The reason I'm pushing on this is that the machine I told you about, the one that profits from keeping you one step behind, it counts on you believing you can't start until you have money. That belief is the lock on the door. And every single thing I've described so far, I did before I had more than $20 at any one time. I didn't save up and then begin. I began, and the saving came from what I stopped losing. So don't wait for the trailer. Seal the box you're in tonight. That's the whole first chapter. and you can start it before this video is over. And that thought is the whole reason I'm here. But before I take you back to the field, I want to share something I put together for people who are exactly where I was. I wrote all of this down, the step-by-step of every fix, every free source, every decision I made, from $11 to a warm kitchen, in a book called First Shelter, and it's part of a series that goes all the way through Built from Nothing. Everything in those pages is the version of this I wish someone had handed me that first October night. If you want the full roadmap, not just the highlights, it's at shelterfromnothing.com. The link is in the description, and it's $97 for the complete set, which is less than 2 nights in that motel I mentioned. Now let me get back to the field, because I told you about a hole in the floor and a thought about animals sleeping where the wind is quiet, and I promised you it comes back. By December, I'd sealed the box and I could heat it, but there was a cold I still couldn't beat, and it came from underneath. The trailer sat up on those flat, cracked tires with open air blowing under the whole floor. All that space beneath me was a wind tunnel, and it was pulling the warmth out of my beautiful patched floor as fast as I could make it. On the worst nights, my propane couldn't keep up, and I'd wake at 3 in the morning to a cold I could see my breath in, watching that carbon monoxide alarm's little light blink green, grateful and freezing at the same time. That's when I remembered the animals, and I found the free thing I've been promising you since the very first minute. I skirted the trailer, I banked it, I built a wall of insulation all the way around the bottom, sealing off that wind tunnel, and I did it with things people throw away by the truckload. Here's exactly how. First, straw bales. Not hay, straw, the leftover stalks after grain is harvested, which farmers sell cheap or give away when they're old and no good for animal feed. Dale had a stack of ruined ones behind his barn he was going to burn, and he let me have as many as I could carry. I stacked them all the way around the base of the trailer, snug against the skirt, a solid wall of them 2 bales high. Straw is one of the oldest insulators there is, full of trapped air, and packed around a foundation it stops wind cold from ever reaching the floor. Then, over and between the bales, I banked dry leaves, free, endless, everywhere in that season, filling every gap the bales left. And where I needed the wall to hold its shape against the wind, I leaned pallet boards and scraps of that dumpster foam against the outside to keep it all packed tight. The night I finished it, I lit my little heater and I went to bed braced for the 3 a.m. cold. It never came. I woke up at dawn and the trailer was still warm. Genuinely warm. 60-something degrees. On a morning the truck outside had frost thick as fur on the windshield. I put my bare feet on that floor, and it was warm. I sat down on my bucket and I cried, honestly, because I understood right then that the thing that saved me wasn't something I bought. It was something the world had thrown away. Ruined straw, dead leaves, broken boards. The exact same things everybody stepped over on their way to somewhere better. And underneath, the ground itself, holding a steady warmth against my floor, now that the wind couldn't steal it, just like it holds a den warm for every animal that ever dug down out of the weather. The whole skirt, the thing that finally made this place a home instead of a shelter, cost me nothing, not $1. And it's the part every expensive renovation forgets, because you can't sell a man a wall made of leaves. That winter got down to 4 degrees one night. I know because I hung a thermometer inside and one outside, and I checked them like a scientist, because after being told I was nothing, I needed the numbers to be real. 4 degrees outside, 58 inside with one small heater running low. A 60-degree difference, held together with dumpster foam, sunshades, moving blankets, cardboard, straw, and leaves. I lived in that trailer for 3 years. Somewhere in the second year, I found steady work again, and the first thing I did wasn't move out. It was pay Dale a little rent he never asked for, and buy real insulation for the walls, and put a proper window where the foam had been. I built the home up around the bones I'd saved, slowly, out of choice instead of desperation. The kitchen I'm standing in right now grew out of that rotten metal box, one salvaged piece at a time. That clerk who called me those people, I think about him sometimes. Not with hate anymore. I think about how sure he was that he knew what I was, and how completely wrong he turned out to be. Every person who looked at me and saw somebody who'd given up was looking at somebody who was about to prove them wrong in the quietest way there is, by simply, stubbornly, warmly surviving. So here's what I want you to carry out of here. It was never about the trailer. It was about refusing to accept that the frost on the inside of the glass was the end of my story. If you've ever been written off, if somebody ever looked at you like your hard luck was your fault, then you already have the one thing this actually takes, and it isn't money. It's the refusal to stay where they put you. You're the kind of person who looks at a thing everyone else calls garbage and sees the wall that's going to keep you warm. Now do something for me, because this older crowd never does it unless I ask straight out. Tell me in the comments what you'd seal first tonight: the windows, the door, or the floor. And tell me where you're watching from, because I read every one and I want to know what corner of the country you're in. If you had one free trailer and one broke winter, what's the first thing you'd fix? Leave it below. I mean it. And if you believe, like I do, that a home can be built back from almost nothing, then come with us. This isn't a channel, it's a bunch of people rebuilding their dignity out of what the world threw away. Stay close, because the next story I'm telling is about a woman who turned an abandoned box truck into a house with heat and running water for under $200. And the part where she got her water for free is going to sound impossible until I show you exactly how she did it. I built a kitchen out of a thing nobody would touch. You can too. I'll see you in the next one. Let me stay a minute longer with you here in my warm kitchen. This video gave you the overview, but inside my membership, The Shelter Builders, I walk you through the whole free scavenged winterizing system, picking up right where I just stopped. Ask me your own question, and I answer you myself, no bot. You belong with the off-grid folks already inside. Point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. Cancel anytime, one click. Now, if that shook you, you'll want to see how I built something safe and truly mine. I took a simple shipping container and turned it into a real off-grid home. It starts right here.